testicles as part of an illegal castration in which he was a willing participant. Yes, you heard me right. This was not an involuntary procedure. However, as you'll soon learn, this person, who hasn't been publicly named, fell prey to some of the most unorthodox criminals on the face of the earth. The patient stated that he'd searched the internet for an unregulated castration, and that's how he met 53-year-old Bob Lee Allen. Bob agreed to perform the surgery, but apparently things took a turn when he allegedly made unsettling comments about being a cannibal and threatened to kill the victim and his loved ones if he ever told the police.
And then we are going to beat the meat.
Naturally, after hearing these disturbing details, doctors and nurses immediately contacted 911.
I have a patient here. He is under a threat that if he reports what really happened, then he will be killed. So basically, for free, he had a castration done that was live streamed by someone in Worcester, Oklahoma, and that the revenue this guy gets from this is from his website and live streaming. But that if he ever tells anybody anything, they will kill him and everybody that he loves.
A social worker employed by the same hospital also dialed 911 just a few moments later.
He's had some illegal stuff happen against him?
Yes, he came here in our emergency department. He was dropped off by the guy. There's some kind of underground surgical stuff that where they basically castrate him. But then he says the doctor's like a cannibal.
When officers arrived, the victim clarified that he'd met Bob about 3 weeks ago on a website that specifically catered to castration surgeries before moving their conversation to Skype. Oddly, the registration for the website had the welcome note, "From the Eunuch Maker and the EM Crew." Still, according to the victim, Bob boasted 15 years of experience in gender reassignment surgeries and showed them a few videos as proof.
In March 2004, I went to the doctor, and after several misdiagnoses, it was determined I had low testosterone. By May, the grass was green, the birds were singing, the jasmine and honeysuckle were in full bloom. Oh, the sweetness of the air. My advice, if you're a male over 30, is get your hormones checked.
Not to mention, he and his husband, 42-year-old Thomas Evan Gates, appeared very active on social media.
You need to get in the picture, Thomas. There we are. Move your plate.
And if I have to learn it, I'm going to shove it down your throat.
Have it. I don't have it. I don't have it.
In this video posted to Facebook, Bob appears to be stumbling and possibly under the influence of a substance. His behavior is extremely odd, and while this may be his quirky personality, his instability points to possible intoxication. Bob also makes several disparaging remarks about himself, mainly,
I'm a wimp, so that's your videos. Bob's a wimp.
Let me hear you say it.
I'm a wimp. I'm a wimp. I'm a wimp. I'm a wimp. I'm a wimp.
They even shared a few intimate moments from their wedding day online.
Got our camera going here, set it up as well.
And live streamed their wedding for friends and family to enjoy.
Congratulations, Chelsea.
However, a deeper dive into their social media accounts revealed some unsettling connections to the claims being made against them, like the attention-grabbing hitch Bob installed on the back of his car.
You done attacking Thomas? Oh no, now he's going for the crotch.
Oh, and the police also came across a very strange video of Bob setting up a funeral for the couple's pet dog. They couldn't skip sharing the ceremony.
Look and make sure I'm standing in the right spot. The trees, the woods around us are serenading amber.
They also shared the cleanup process after the funeral.
Okay, the camera. It's not too heavy. You got me? Pointed right direction?
I think so.
It's unclear if the victim being treated at the hospital saw these slightly disturbing posts before he agreed to his surgery, but nevertheless, Bob bragged to him about having 6 other clients in line for similar procedures. He told the victim that he would happily perform the castration free of charge. But there were a few conditions. First, Bob stated Thomas would assist in the operation, which may not have raised any eyebrows, but then his requests got bizarre. Bob said he would live stream the entire procedure to make money on his website and store all extracted body parts in his freezer. On October 11th, the victim flew from Virginia to Dallas and was greeted at the gate by Bob. After leaving the airport, they began the long journey back to his home, a secluded cabin in southeast Oklahoma where he lived with Thomas. Disturbingly, the couple promoted this location on Airbnb as a $45 per night vacation rental called Bob's Weekend Wonders.
Got 4 bunk beds, well, two bunk beds, 4 beds total. Then we got another bathroom and our master bedroom.
According to court documents, Bob offered the victim a separate bedroom to sleep in and told them the surgery would take place the following evening. At around 5 p.m. on October 12th, Bob and Thomas performed the 2-hour procedure using only local anesthetic, meaning the patient was awake the entire time. While details surrounding the operation are limited, investigators learned it took place on a wooden table blanketed in hospital gowns. Parts of the victim's statements have never been verified or proven, but according to him, soon after Bob finished the surgery, he laughed and called himself a cannibal, saying he would later eat his body parts. Oh, and he also recalled Bob stating he'd performed a similar operation on another person who he called crazy, and that he'd intentionally failed to stitch up the wound, leaving them to bleed to death overnight. The next day following the surgery, the victim woke up to excessive bleeding, and after briefly losing consciousness, he begged Bob to transport him to the hospital. Initially, Bob coldly replied, "No ER, no morgue," and refused the desperate requests, but for unknown reasons, he had a change of heart later in the day and drove the gravely injured patient to the hospital. While en route to the hospital, the victim recalled Bob threatening that if he passed out or died during the drive, he would dump his body in the woods. Then, when they arrived at the hospital, Bob reportedly commanded, if anyone asks, he'd done it to himself. So after getting a complete statement of the horrifying incident from the victim, officers obtained a search warrant for Bob and Thomas's cabin on October 15th. And despite knowing the sickening tale, what they found was far beyond their worst nightmares. When they arrived, deputies immediately noticed that there were no cars at the residence, and they gained entry by kicking the door down. Once inside, officers uncovered a freezer containing a plastic Ziploc bag with what appeared to be testicles. Oh, but that's not all. They also found various prescription drugs, adult diapers, surgical tools covered in blood, restraint straps, and a locker containing bags of psychedelic mushrooms. Finally, officers seized several storage devices with recordings of different surgeries. As the search was going on at their home, Bob and Thomas were actually arriving at the hospital, supposedly to check in on the victim. Both men were immediately taken into custody. Bob adamantly denied any claims of cannibalism, but regardless, he and Thomas were each charged with felony counts of performing unlicensed surgery, conspiracy to commit unlicensed surgery, maiming an assault, and battery with a dangerous weapon. Both men also faced a misdemeanor charge of failure to bury the removed parts. Even though Thomas allegedly only assisted Bob with these illegal acts, Thomas was charged for acting in concert and therefore faced the same charges as Bob. Thomas accepted a plea deal in which he would testify against Bob, and in exchange, the felony charges against him were dropped. Thomas received a sweetheart deal. Oftentimes, the first person to flip on the other gets the better deal. Bob was set to go to trial, but he ultimately entered a plea of no contest and was sentenced to 10 years in prison plus 2 years in jail. Despite the victim making a full recovery, Bob told the judge he chose to enter this plea because a jury might convict me. What you just saw might not look like anything more than a car entering a parking garage, but when you find out what the person believed to be behind the wheel did mere hours earlier, this video will send chills up your spine. On September 29, 2005, officers from the Aurora Police Department in Illinois responded to a 911 call at the upscale suburban home of 34-year-old James Jimmy Sow and his wife, 31-year-old Catherine Kate Sow. The couple had failed to show up to work that morning, and it was so out of character that Jimmy's brother, Chu Chi, immediately went to their house to make sure everything was okay. Chu Chi tried knocking and ringing the doorbell, but got no answer. So he peeked through a window, and that's when he saw something that made his blood run cold. A woman lying motionless on the floor in a pool of blood. The fire department arrived first and gained entry to the home by breaking down the front door. Strangely, Chu Chi was allowed to go inside without gloves, which would have compromised the investigation. Moreover, the worried brother had no idea that he was walking into one of the worst crime scenes this state had ever encountered. The first thing everyone saw inside the home was a woman's body on the ground next to the doorway. It was immediately clear that she was deceased from a gunshot wound to the head. Then, as officers worked to secure the scene and check for any other victims, they came across what appeared to be someone sitting on the couch. However, they quickly realized the person wasn't alive, and Chuchi identified him as his brother, Jimmy. It appeared he'd been attacked unexpectedly, as the TV was still on and his laptop computer had seemingly slid off his lap onto the floor. Investigators continued moving through the home and found another blood-soaked body in the hallway leading to the primary bedroom. While someone severely beat the victim's face until it was almost beyond recognition, Chuchi knew it was Kate. Still, the gruesome discoveries didn't end there. Another male victim was located in the garage lying between two vehicles with a gunshot wound to his head. His head had been wrapped in a towel and covered with a plastic bag. Detectives noted several areas in the home with blood smears, and while they found handprints, the absence of ridge lines where the fingerprints would have been told them that the killer had been wearing gloves. They also located 2 partial shoe prints that didn't belong to the victims or those who entered the crime scene that morning. Finally, there were no signs of forced entry into the home. The lack of forced entry and the overkill committed to Kate are both indications that the perpetrator was likely known to the victims and possibly motivated by rage. Next, as authorities worked to identify the 2 unknown victims, they also began scouring the neighborhood looking for potential leads. Someone living across the street from the Sows noted a car parked in their driveway that morning at around 6 a.m. that didn't belong to Kate or Jimmy. Additionally, the vehicle appeared to have been moved to the other side of the driveway roughly 20 minutes later when the neighbor looked again and was gone later that morning. Another neighbor of the Hansons reported that the whole house was bright at around 2 a.m. that night, which she stated was very unusual. Meanwhile, autopsies soon confirmed that the woman found lying just inside the doorway was Kate's mother, Mary, and the man in the garage was her father, Terry. Both were dressed in sleepwear with their bodies lying on plastic painter tarps. The medical examiner also disclosed the horrible truth about what had happened to the 4 victims. Kate had suffered 40 wounds, including 22 abrasions and bumps on her head and 18 on her torso and limbs. The medical examiner believed some of the injuries on her body to be defensive, like her ring finger, which had been bent backwards so violently that it snapped. Jimmy's death resulted from 12 brutal blows to his head with an unknown object, possibly a metal pipe or baseball bat, which left indents in some places. Terry and Mary both passed away from a single gunshot wound to their heads. While Terry had been shot at close range from behind, Mary appeared to have been facing her attacker when the fatal shot was fired. Finally, the medical examiner stated that none of the victims had any traces of drugs or alcohol in their system. Based on the state of the bodies, it was evident they hadn't been dead for long, but investigators still needed to narrow the timeline. Forensic analysis of Jimmy's computer revealed that the last keystroke was made just before 11 p.m. on September 28th, the day before 911 was called. Therefore, it appeared that at least his murder took place at that time. Furthermore, investigators felt certain that Mary and Terry hadn't been killed at the Sows' home, so they sent a forensic team to their house in Naperville, Illinois, approximately 5 minutes away. While the first day of searching yielded no results, a horrifying discovery was eventually made in one of the spare bedrooms. An officer moved a mattress off the bed and found blood stains underneath. Investigators then shifted their focus to Terry and Mary's bedroom, and what they found was disturbing, to say the very least. They located 2 distinct holes in the wooden headboard, but oddly, one appeared to have been made with a drill while the other went clean through. Detectives speculated that someone had attempted to disguise the bullet holes. Also, a bullet was recovered from an attic joist behind the bedroom wall, and ballistics testing later confirmed it matched those found in Mary and Terry's bodies. Authorities also searched Mary's car while at the residence and found several bloodstains on the floor carpets in the back seat. DNA testing later confirmed that the blood belonged to Terry, implying that someone had used Mary's car to transport the bodies to the Sow residence. Adding weight to that theory, one of the Sows' neighbors confirmed that it was Mary's car they briefly spotted that morning. So whoever committed this heinous crime also returned the car to Mary and Terry's driveway after staging the crime scene at the Sow home. Investigators contacted Mary and Terry's other daughter, Jennifer, and she confirmed that the mattress found in the spare bedroom had been swapped with the one from her parents' bedroom, implying that they had been killed as they slept. But that wasn't the only useful piece of information she had for detectives. Jennifer informed them that Kate had called her roughly 6 weeks earlier with a very unsettling story about their younger brother, Eric. At the time of the murders, Mary and Terry's 28-year-old son Eric was still living with them in a basement bedroom of the family home. He'd recently started working as a loan originator, also known as an independent mortgage broker, and was getting paid solely on commission, which was hardly enough to make a living. However, when asked by his boss how he was making ends meet, Eric replied that his parents largely supported him financially. Eric's girlfriend Allison noticed he'd been spending a lot more money in recent years, and when she asked about his finances, he claimed to be doing very well at his job. Eric's sisters also noticed the change in his spending habits, but he gave them the same response, and while they were still suspicious, neither had any idea what was happening beneath the facade. You see, in July 2004, Eric rented a post office box in his and his mother's names without her permission. Then he applied for a Capital One MasterCard under the name Mary Hansen, also without her consent, and made himself the authorized user. From there, Eric used the post office box as a destination for all incoming statements and began spending money like crazy. One of the things he purchased was a Garmin GPS, which becomes important to the case later. As if that wasn't bad enough, Eric opened several more charge cards in his mother's name, but by August 2005, his sister Kate had caught on to the scheme. It's unclear how exactly she found out, but Kate immediately called Jennifer and told her about the roughly $80,000 their brother had charged. The unsuspecting mother, Mary, eventually found out and confronted Eric alongside his sisters. He promised to pay her back if they agreed not to tell his father, but Kate wasn't having it and told him she fully intended to inform their father of what he'd done. That's when things took a sinister turn. Eric turned to Kate and said, "If you tell Dad, I'll f***ing kill you." She was understandably rattled by the threat and even took the following day off work to calm down. She also allegedly turned on her home security system as an extra precaution, but it wouldn't save her in the end. If you ever suspect a family member of fraud, it may be in your best interest to involve a third party such as law enforcement, a lawyer, or a family counselor before confronting the person. If your suspicions are correct, they may react with anger about being caught, and their behavior could possibly escalate to violence in order to keep their secret. Then, later that same month, Kate expressed her concerns to Eric's girlfriend Allison, but she reportedly claimed to be under strict instructions from Eric not to speak with her or Jennifer. Allison later told investigators that Eric frequently demanded to know if she'd been communicating with his sisters, and told her she was going to get it if he found out she was disobeying him. Furthermore, Eric's boss stated that his attendance at work had dwindled to virtually nothing in the months leading up to the murder. Then, on September 19th, just 10 days before the bodies were discovered, Eric lied to his boss, saying his brother-in-law had passed away and he needed to take some time off. He never returned to work after telling that lie, and when cleaning out his desk, his boss found a checkbook belonging to Mary. A pattern of irresponsibility, such as frequently skipping work, and a history of lying are two red flags for antisocial personality disorder, APD, which is a mental health disorder characterized by a disregard for and violation of others' rights. To our knowledge, Eric was never diagnosed with APD or any other mental disorder. Now, that leads us to September 28th. Eric called his sister Jennifer and asked to stay overnight at her house in Minnesota for an upcoming Vikings game. This request struck Jennifer as very odd because she had a strained relationship with her brother and he never visited her family. That evening, Eric was at home with his parents and spoke to Allison on the home phone around 11:30. The next day, Terry and Mary's co-workers started becoming concerned when they failed to show up for work, so a few of them drove to their home and made entry through the garage using a keypad they had been given access to. Once inside, they noticed a raging fire in the couple's indoor fireplace, which was beyond odd as it was typically only used around Christmas time. Furthermore, the home smelled strongly of air fresheners, but everything in the rest of the house appeared perfectly normal. Before leaving the residence, the curious co-workers went to leave a note and noticed one already written by Eric, reading, "Mom, Dad, see you Sunday, have fun in Galena." The message was left next to some cash that Eric labeled payment this month. Apparently, Terry and Mary had been planning to take a romantic trip to Galena, and were expected to leave very soon. Jennifer was contacted by one of the co-workers at her parents' home, and they explained the strange things they'd uncovered there. Concerned, she asked if they could go check out her sister Kate's house as well, and when they arrived, a police officer who'd already found the 4 bodies reportedly told them, "It's not pretty in there." So the question is, where was Eric during all of this? Well, Eric had actually planned a trip to California with his girlfriend Allison and caught a flight on September 29th, the day the bodies were found, and presumably the day after Kate, Jimmy, Terry, and Mary were killed. Eric arrived in California and told Allison that he was going to take a nap because a rotten mattress caused him to have a terrible sleep the night before. Shortly after his arrival, the same co-worker that had contacted Jennifer called Eric to tell him the horrific news about his family. However, rather than ask who was deceased, Eric strangely remarked, "How did people know to go looking over there?" Eric then spoke with a detective who had a lot of questions for him. He claimed he had no idea what was going on and told the detective that despite seeming to leave the state right after his family was killed, he wasn't running from anything. The detective asked if he'd ever threatened his sister or parents. Eric paused for approximately 30 seconds before saying he had not, but when the detective divulged details of the crime and implied that he might be responsible, Eric became emotional and hung up. Interestingly, a long pause is often seen before a lie because the brain has to do 3 things simultaneously: keep you from telling the truth, create a lie, and deliver the lie, unlike when someone's being honest. Following the conversation, Eric told Allison the news about his family, and sensing that something wasn't quite right, she contacted the police. Authorities informed her that Eric had fallen under suspicion for the murders, but little did she know he was already long gone. At this point, investigators put out a nationwide alert for his immediate apprehension. Now, it's unclear how exactly this occurred, but at some point during his time in California, Eric managed to steal a red Saab in the Los Angeles area. And contrary to what he told detectives, it's believed he drove the stolen vehicle back to the airport and abandoned it in the garage with plans to return home. Inside the airport, Eric seemed desperate to leave the state and made 2 unsuccessful attempts to check in before finally boarding a flight to Chicago just before 8 p.m. During one of the earlier attempts, a ticket agent actually noticed that he was flagged in the system for immediate apprehension. But rather than calmly contact the police, the ticket agent shouted this exact phrase, "What's going on here? You're the guy," alerting Eric and giving him ample time to run away from the ticket counter before anyone could respond to the situation. The next day, on September 30th, Eric called the investigator again and told him that he was still in California, but unfortunately for him, cell phone towers don't lie. The FBI quickly traced Eric's phone to a freeway in Illinois, heading towards his sister Jennifer's house. Based on the odd request he'd made to stay with her a few days earlier, authorities feared he might be en route to harm Jennifer and instructed her to take her family and leave immediately. Meanwhile, officers raced to catch up with him, and fortunately, it didn't take long. Eric was pulled over as he tried to evade police and swiftly arrested for intimidation relating to his threat against Kate. He said he was aware that the police wanted to speak with him regarding the murders, but claimed to have no idea that there was an outstanding warrant out for his arrest. Eric may have been planning to harm Jennifer, as the officers suspected. It's possible that he thought if he eliminated her, there would be no one left to tell police about the fraud he committed under his mother's name, or the altercation he had with his mother and Kate. A search of his car revealed several incriminating pieces of evidence, including bags of new clothing purchased with Mary's credit card, vinyl gloves inside a plastic bag from Mary and Terry's home with some kind of brown substance on them, and several pieces of jewelry that had belonged to Kate and Jimmy. Oh, and remember that Garmin GPS system from earlier? Well, as it turns out, it had been turned off on the night of September 28th, around the time he'd gone out for drinks. The device was reactivated at around 9:30 the following day, just a few hours before the bodies were found. It seemed that someone was attempting to hide their movements on that fateful night. Still, the most damning piece of evidence came from the gloves found in Eric's car. DNA testing confirmed that the brown substance on them was a mixture of Terry and Mary's blood. Investigators also located the Saab, which Eric adamantly denied stealing, and transported it to a storage location for processing. Eric was subsequently charged with murder and placed in jail. During this time, detectives attempted to elicit a confession from Eric during several interrogations over 3 days. but he refused to acknowledge any wrongdoing despite the mounting evidence against him. Instead, Eric admitted that he had a poor relationship with his family members, but claimed he wasn't a bad person and could never kill them. However, contrary to his claims, detectives eventually determined that Eric had stolen more than $140,000 from his parents via credit card fraud. Eric's trial commenced in February 2008, and the evidence against him was overwhelming. Some of the most incriminating details were that Eric would have been present in the home when his parents were shot, though he testified that he never heard gunshots and that bloody gloves containing Mary and Terry's DNA were found in a plastic bag in Eric's car. But that wasn't it. In order for the jury to find him innocent, they would have to believe that the GPS device in Eric's car somehow deactivated itself, and that someone besides him got into Kate and Jimmy's house and bludgeoned them to death, and also got into Mary and Terry's house, all without breaking in, and shot them while Eric was sleeping downstairs. And finally, the jury would have to believe someone other than Eric attempted to make it look like the Sows' home was the primary crime scene, thus deflecting suspicion from Eric. In the end, Eric was found guilty of 4 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of armed robbery, 2 counts of aggravated kidnapping, and 2 counts of identity theft. Prosecutors succeeded in proving beyond a reasonable doubt that Eric had killed his family in order to cover up his theft. Eric was ultimately sentenced to death, but after appealing the sentence, the residing governor commuted his sentence to life imprisonment after dropping the aggravated kidnapping charge.
Can I help you?
Hi, I think my friend's dad called you guys earlier. My friend's been missing all day. She hasn't gone to work or anything.
Where's she missing from?
She was at my house and she never made it to work. But then I just found her van right in the side of my house, and her keys are in the car, and there's like stuff everywhere. And she's not in here though.
When 33-year-old Rebecca Becky Klein failed to show up for her job as a caregiver for disabled people, alarm bells immediately went off. Her girlfriend, 28-year-old Nicole Abou-Sharif, reported her missing later that day, but as investigators worked to untangle the twisted case, they made a shocking discovery that captured media attention nationwide as a love triangle gone wrong. It all began on March 16, 2007 in Villa Park, Illinois, where Becky and Nicole shared a house they had purchased just 9 months earlier. The two women weren't married but had been in a committed relationship for 7 years. According to Nicole, Becky left for work as usual that morning, but at around 11:30 she received a call from Becky's employer, who said she never showed up. When the concerned boss told her he'd been unable to reach Becky, Nicole explained that her cell phone had not been working the past few days. However, Becky's boss found that comment odd because he'd spoken with her several times in the previous 2 days, and she never mentioned having any trouble with her phone. Following that conversation, Nicole contacted Becky's mother to see if she'd heard from her daughter that morning. She said she hadn't and immediately called Becky's father and sister to see if they'd spoken with her, but no one had heard from the reliable caregiver. As worry began to grow, Becky's mother called Nicole back and expressed her fears that something was terribly wrong. Nicole told her that she would drive around to look for Becky's work van, and just after 1 p.m., she found it parked on the street right around the corner from their house. Prompted by this alarming discovery, Nicole contacted the police and reported her girlfriend missing.
Did you already make a missing person report?
No, I was going home to do it right now.
Is this a house or an apartment?
No, it's my house, but like the van is like right in front of my house, like right on the side. I just noticed it.
So her van is there with the keys in it?
Yeah, like it's not even like my house is a stop sign. It's like on the side of the street. And her boss called me at noon and was like, "Is she coming in today?" I'm like, she left this morning to go to work.
So she's not inside the house or inside the van?
No, not at all.
Officers arrived on scene and found that the doors to the van were left unlocked, with the keys still in the ignition and Becky's belongings abandoned on the front seat. The van, which Becky used to transport her elderly and disabled clients, was then towed to a storage area for further examination, but they ultimately found no significant evidence. Meanwhile, Nicole told one of the officers that she and Becky had been doing things around the house the night before and went to bed without any problems. She said she'd been briefly woken up when Becky left for work at 6:30 that morning, and the two kissed goodbye. Then Nicole said she was reawakened by Becky's boss calling around 11:30. Nicole also made sure to tell officers that they had a very loving and committed relationship. However, when speaking with another officer, Nicole was overheard saying Becky had left for work at 7:30, not 6:30. At this point, Becky's parents had arrived at the couple's house, and authorities asked Nicole to accompany them to the bank to see if there had been any unusual transactions on her account. While Nicole initially refused, stating she wanted to be home if Becky returned, she eventually agreed to go to the bank. However, they didn't notice anything out of the ordinary, as her bank accounts hadn't even been touched that day. Meanwhile, upon hearing the news, Becky's sister raced to the couple's home and was met by Nicole, her parents, and the police. She went inside to look around, as detectives hadn't yet entered the home, and quickly located Becky's phone on a windowsill in the basement. Becky's sister told authorities that she had been at the couple's house the day before, helping set up for a family birthday party. She recalled leaving shortly after 7 in the evening and called Becky at around 8, but got no response. Furthermore, her sister said the two usually spoke on the phone during her work commute, but she never got a call this morning. The rest of the day and night passed with no word from Becky, and by the next day, it was clear to everyone that something awful had happened to her. So, investigators asked Nicole if they could search outside her home for clues. Once again, she initially refused to cooperate, but after much insistence from the police, she agreed to the search. Authorities found this especially strange because Nicole had reportedly consented to a search of her house and garage without hesitation the day before, although it never took place that day. Regardless, as the search began, investigators immediately noticed several pairs of latex gloves in a trash can behind the home and one lying on the ground in front of the residence. As most people in the true crime world know, latex gloves are never a good sign. But still, no one could have imagined the horrifying discovery waiting in the garage. But first, investigators went inside the house, and nothing seemed to be out of the ordinary at first. However, investigators noticed something strange in one of the bedrooms. It appeared to be a mess of tangled clear packing tape on and around the comforter. It's unclear if this tape was related to Becky's disappearance, but there's no denying that it seems suspicious. Then investigators moved to the garage where they found Nicole's vintage Mustang parked inside. They couldn't help but notice that the car had a layer of dust everywhere except for a spot on the lid of the trunk. An officer asked Nicole for the keys to the trunk, but she claimed only to have ignition keys. So another investigator climbed into the vehicle's back seat and removed a speaker from the rear deck. That's when he saw something straight out of a nightmare. Looking through the hole where the speaker used to be, the detective could see what appeared to be a person lying in the fetal position with a plastic bag over their head. Despite Nicole's claims that she didn't have keys to the trunk, the intensive search inside the home revealed 2 sets of keys that fit the trunk lock. Officers finally unlocked the trunk and, much to their horror, found Becky's deceased body. Her hands and feet were bound with duct tape, and her mouth had also been taped shut. Becky also had bandanas covering her eyes and mouth, and a plastic bag taped around her head. Detectives cordoned off the home as it officially became an active crime scene. Becky's autopsy showed no outward signs of injury and listed her cause of death as suffocation. According to the medical examiner, someone had secured the plastic bag over her head so tightly that no air could get through. Finally, based on the contents of her stomach, they determined that Becky had been killed within an hour and a half of her last meal. Authorities found no signs of forced entry to the garage, and based on the location of the body, Nicole quickly became the prime suspect. What's even more shocking is that the elaborate and twisted lie was only just beginning to unravel, and even more disturbing revelations were soon exposed. Investigators began questioning those closest to Becky to gain further insight into their relationship. According to Becky's sister, in March 2002, Becky tried to break up with Nicole but decided to stick it out when she threatened to drink herself to death. Becky's sister couldn't recall any other significant disagreements between the pair other than that one incident. But then, shortly after purchasing their home, her sister said that Nicole had become distant and began spending more and more time in their basement on the computer at night. Nicole threatening to kill herself if Becky ended the relationship is a big red flag. This is a form of control that can be found in abusive relationships. When someone says they will take their own life if their significant other leaves them, they're playing on their partner's emotions and manipulating them into staying. If you're in an abusive relationship and need help, contact a domestic violence shelter in your area or reach out to the National Domestic Violence Hotline. Becky's mother said that she knew her daughter wanted to have children someday and that Nicole did not. Still, the grieving mother was unaware of any other issues or arguments between the pair, but one of their neighbors was about to expose a shocking secret. When investigators canvassed the area looking for clues, one neighbor reported seeing a car that didn't belong to Becky or Nicole parked in the driveway the night before. Instead, they said it belonged to a woman named Rose Sidaro, who they had apparently met in passing before. The neighbor also said he saw Becky's white van in the driveway that morning, but when he looked again at around 10:30, someone had moved it to the corner near his house. Now, this is where things take a wild turn. As it turns out, neither Becky nor her family had any idea that Nicole had been secretly talking to and hanging out with a 19-year-old woman named Rose. When detectives inquired about whether she may have been unfaithful to Becky, Nicole claimed Rose had simply left her car in her driveway overnight and gotten a ride home from another friend because she was intoxicated. Nicole said she never stayed the night, and she stated that she didn't even know her phone number or home address. Not buying her story, detectives brought Rose in for questioning the same day Becky's body was found. But she supposedly didn't explain the true nature of their relationship at the time because she felt embarrassed. But she did admit to being with Nicole on the night of March 15th. It ultimately didn't matter that Rose was evasive about her relationship with Nicole because a computer crimes investigator quickly uncovered the truth. Nicole was clearly having an intimate relationship with Rose. They revealed a plethora of MySpace messages from various accounts owned by Nicole under different names. One of those accounts detailed her relationship with Rose through a string of back-and-forth messages. Then, in a shocking admission, Rose stated that she and Nicole had met on MySpace a year before the murder, in March 2006. She said they quickly went from chatting online to talking on the phone regularly, and eventually they met in person. The relationship soon became intimate, and according to Rose, Nicole told her that she and her brother had been firefighters in New York City before both falling ill with a rare genetic disorder known as Wilson's disease. None of it was true. At some point in 2006, Nicole even went so far as to tell Rose that she was going in for a liver transplant, but refused to tell her where she was being hospitalized. These lies may have been an attempt for Nicole to gain Rose's attention and sympathy. In the summer of 2006, Rose said she ended their relationship because her mother disapproved of Nicole, but they had reportedly begun talking again by the fall. All the while, Becky and Nicole were still together. Then, on March 15, 2007, just one day before Becky went missing, Rose invited Nicole to go bowling with her and some friends. Nicole also invited Rose to her house beforehand, but she declined, and the two eventually settled on meeting at a restaurant shortly after 9 p.m. After dinner, they went bowling, and Nicole allegedly became intoxicated to the point that Rose had to drive her home. So, based on this timeline, Nicole must have murdered Becky before she met up with Rose, and then went out like nothing was wrong. Next, Rose said she and Nicole arrived at her Park Villa house around 3 a.m., and she noticed a white van parked further up the driveway. When they went inside, there was no one else in the house, and Nicole got clothes for Rose to sleep in. But when she got into the bedroom, Rose said she was alarmed to see a gun resting in an open case on the bed. When confronted about the weapon, Nicole allegedly told her not to worry about it and placed it on the bedside table. Rose insisted during her testimony that she had no idea Becky lived there or that the two were in a relationship. The following day, Rose said Nicole woke up between 7 and 8 a.m., and she fell back asleep for some time before getting up to watch TV together. However, roughly 20 minutes later, Nicole got several phone calls that visibly upset her. The two eventually departed around noon to pick up Nicole's car, which had been left at the restaurant the night before. But before they left, Nicole told Rose that her friend was missing, and that's why she was getting so many calls. Rose dropped Nicole off at her car and headed home. They made plans to meet up that afternoon, but a few hours later, Nicole called with an unsettling request. According to Rose, Nicole told her that if she gets pulled over by the police, it would be in her best interest to deny knowing her and that she should also lie about having a MySpace account. So, as you can see, Rose's story differed significantly from what Nicole had told investigators and painted a very different picture of that fateful evening. As the investigation continued, detectives learned that Becky and Nicole both held life insurance with the same company, with each woman serving as the beneficiary of the other's policy. Furthermore, the insurance company reported that Becky was insured for $250,000. Back at Nicole and Becky's home, a forensic team of experts located 3 fingerprints on the Mustang's trunk that were proven to be from Nicole's left hand. Now, as if that wasn't bad enough, they also found her prints on the plastic bag covering Becky's head and her DNA on the bandanas used to cover Becky's eyes and mouth. Finally, detectives found a roll of